name's Irene Vincent, being a minority among minorities. I squirmed in the back seat of my parents' car as thoughts about my life in the ghetto bubbled up in my mind. Until I was 9, my family lived in a ghetto that was 98% African American people. Through the 3rd grade, I was the only white girl in my class. Of course, I didn't know that my friends were a minority. I didn't even understand why so many people on TV were white. We lived in one of 7 14-story apartment buildings surrounding the concrete desert of our playground. And yet, played out in the cement oval was a world of performance art. Even among the traumas of the ghetto, I remembered some wonderful experiences. Often in the summer, the old black men would set up a stage for singing and tap dancing contests. My friends and I would watch with total fascination, imitate their performances, and add our own spontaneous tap dancing, cartwheels, and springing back to our feet from the splits. So easy for small girls. Lost for a while in the rhythms of our games. Dancing and singing were all around me. Dance was one area of free-flowing expression for me. Somehow the music automatically traveled through my body and made me dance. Then I remembered one of my worst experiences happened when I was 4. Mom and I had walked a short way from our building when we saw Ruth, my 9-year-old sister, playing in the cement oval area. Mom yelled at Ruth to come home for dinner. But Ruth kept playing. Jasmine, a black lady who was walking by with her own daughter, misunderstood my mom's words and thought they were directed at her daughter. I saw Jasmine's whole body exploding with anger. Jasmine's eyes widened and her nostrils flared, and she yelled, "You got no right to talk to my daughter like that." I held tight to my mom's hand while whispering, "Mommy, be careful." But Mom was defiant and said, "I'm not talking to your daughter or to you." Jasmine chased us to the front cement area of our building, still screaming at us. She grabbed my mother by the hair and started to beat her as my sister and I watched with horror. We started crying. We were in shock. Surrounding Jasmine and Mom, a gang of black people formed a circle and started yelling, "Kill her, kill her." My sister and I were terrified. We wanted to stay by Mom's side, but we knew we had to get help. We ran up the 4 flights of stairs to our apartment and called the police. My mom was carried away in the ambulance and spent a month in a hospital. Jasmine spent a few months in prison. Since my father worked all day and had a routine of drinking alcohol after work, my brother Ed, my sister Ruth, and I were taken to a foster home located on a farm outside Rochester. Although we were treated well, we never felt protected or secure. I felt deserted and scared. We prayed for our mother's recovery. After an eternal month, she showed up in a car to take us home. We moved away from the predominantly black ghetto to a merely low-class white neighborhood and lived there for a few years. Eventually, it was safe for Mom, Eddie, Ruth, and me to move back to the housing project. Apparently, while Mom was visiting her best friend Agnes, who lived in the project, Jasmine saw Mom and formally apologized for hurting her. They became friends. That made Mom happy because within their friendship was sealed an unspoken oath that Jasmine would protect Mom. Mom and Dad had separated just before we moved back to the project. My mom worked, but we still needed help from welfare services, and this was where the welfare made us live. Mom was probably one of the cleanest people in the building. We lived on the first floor across from an incinerator opening with a metal closure. People were supposed to throw their bags of garbage through the opening to land in the furnace in the basement below. Children and some adults often left their bags of garbage toppled on the floor. Mom would often be in the hallway cleaning up the spilled garbage. She didn't want our apartment to get cockroaches. When anyone came to our apartment, they always said, "Wow, Mrs., you have the cleanest apartment I've ever seen. How can you possibly keep it so clean with 3 kids and all?" Mom, lighting up like a decorated Christmas tree, always replied, "Oh, my mom used to call me spick and span. I just like things clean." She took pride in cleanliness. I know this because she was always making me pick up my toys and throw them away. I remembered how proud I was when I painted an old wooden crate bright red. I set it on my little play table and announced it was my bookcase. I placed my 3 precious books into it. Mom shook her head every time she looked at my bookcase. "Surely you don't need that bookcase, Irene." She was using my sweet name, Irene, even though she wasn't feeling all that sweet toward me in the moment. "Yes, I do," I said. "It's so beautiful. I painted it such a bright red. It cost me 50 cents to paint." Eventually, Mom's constant nagging wore me down, and I finally relented. "Okay, Mom, you can throw it away. I'll find another place to put my books." At that time, food was scarce in our apartment. It seemed as if we only ate macaroni, cheese, and eggs. Sometimes we ate fish on Fridays. I loved it when Dad came to take us kids to his apartment on Sundays. He often cooked us a delicious meal of fried potatoes, meat, and vegetables. Then he would take us for a hike in nature, to the zoo, or fishing, or sent us to a movie. Sometimes our Italian Uncle Al invited us over to his house for homemade pasta and marinara sauce. Grandma and my sister Janie, who was 6 years older than me, lived in the apartment across from my Aunt Dolly. My Aunt Dolly and Grandma made us pies and cakes. Aunt Dolly designed and sewed all her own clothing, which really impressed me. My cousin David, Uncle Al, and Aunt Dolly's only child had all kinds of toys and books. It was a thrill and a relief to visit them. As I grew older, our vertical slum became a scarier place. Just visiting a friend on an upper floor felt like a military maneuver. Alone, I would slowly climb each flight of stairs, peeking around corners, making sure no drunk or rapist lurked on the stairwell. Girls got raped in the hallways, mostly near the basement entrance. Sometimes we would hear their screams and Mom would call the police. These stories, with all their gory details, would go around the project. The building had an elevator, but the other kids and I would only ride in there if there were at least 3 of us. Tiny and white, I was often the last person chosen to play on any team. Sometimes the other kids made me just sit and watch them play a game. During those times, I felt rejected and humiliated. I developed empathy for the underdog. I cannot bear to see this happen to anyone. I became street smart by watching people's body language and observing the tricks they played on other people. I learned compassion by seeing the needless pain people inflicted upon one another and by seeing the affection my friends' parents poured on their children. They often told us jokes, making us laugh. Many of my friends' parents also invited me to their churches, where the people sang with overwhelming love, emotion, and devotion. Their churches were a source of great joy to me. Although I was petite, I became a fast runner. Because I was a white girl, every so often the other kids would decide they were going to pin me down and put ants in my hair or perform some other small act of torture. I usually got a running start, but was often chased for miles. Breathless, I once ran a stranger's doorbell and asked the lady to let me into her home to hide until the other kids tired of looking for me. By the time I made it back, the kids were on to another gang. Fights between teenage boys and men were frequent, egged on to excess by crowds that appeared instantly from nowhere. Sometimes I stood with my friends watching these horrid fights and crying with fear and compassion, identifying with those in pain. I would ask my friends to leave with me because I was too scared to leave alone. Sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't, as when one young man's head was split open and bright arterial blood streamed down the cement curb. It was so difficult to get these violent images out of my mind. They played over and over. When I saw violence on TV, I felt the pain of the victims, so I often had to leave the room. I became scared of any type of gathering of people because I felt that the crowd could easily become unruly. One night, Ruth and I were alone in the apartment. I called to her, "Ruth, come listen. Some man is calling the other man a dirty, effing bastard." One man yelled, "You get that knife away from me, you nigger." Screams of agony followed. We heard bashing and thumping sounds of bodies hitting against the hard surfaces. Ruthie cried out, "Oh my God, it sounds like they're killing each other. Someone has got to call the police, but I don't think we should." We stood there scared to death behind our locked apartment door. Finally, we heard sirens and then lots of people shuffling around. Then it grew ominously quiet outside. The next morning, I shivered from seeing fresh blood splattered all over the walls in the main entry. I ran outside to play. Thanks to Miss Curry, my third grade teacher, I learned that there might be better places to live. Miss Curry was also my first black teacher. She cared about us. One sunny day, she gave us a strong and passionate lecture on the importance of education, including the levels we needed to traverse: grammar school, middle school, high school, and college. She emphasized why we really needed to go to college. "When you children grow up," she said, "education is your only escape from the ghetto." I raised my hand. "Miss Curry, I have lots of playmates and I don't understand why I need to escape from where I live." "Once you become an adult in the ghetto," she said, "your life is always in danger and you always need to protect your children and your home. If you own anything, the people here will destroy it or rob you of it. You need to get an education so you can have choices in life." She convinced me because I already knew that as a white adult, my life in the ghetto would even be more at risk. So on that day, I decided I would study hard. I would go to this place called college. Also in third grade, we were given intelligence tests. None of us really knew what that meant. The tests seemed meaningless to us. A few weeks later, Miss Curry announced, "I want you students to know that 3 of you in my class received the highest scores on the intelligence test. The best scores went to Robert, Irene, and Ginny. I'm encouraging you to always study hard so you can go to college, but remember, all of you have the ability to go to college," she went on. "As a reward, we're having a class play. I'm going to give Robert, Irene, and Jenny first choice for the leading roles. You're to remember your lines and then we'll practice your parts." This news encouraged me to think that I had a chance to go to college, and I was excited about being in a play. Upon returning from my trip back to the ghetto, I was able to release my past. I felt sad that I'd never see my old friends again. I guess I needed to be grateful for my new life. Thank you.